Welcome back to the 1% Insight. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Guntram Friede. Guntram is the VP of Marketing at Celonis and is also an investor and advisor to B2B Tech startups. Guntram's career and skills place a key focus on go-to-market, revenue, marketing, and driving real revenue impact for the companies he works with. Today's conversation will focus on how B2B tech companies can drive and attribute revenue from their marketing efforts. Welcome to the 1% Insight, Guntram.
Thank you very much, Jack. Lovely being here.
Can you walk us through your career to date and how you kind of got into the world of B2B tech, B2B SaaS, and how you kind of delved into the key areas of go-to-market, revenue, marketing, and AI?
Let me actually start off by introducing you to my current role, where I'm leading the EMEA marketing as VP marketing at Celonis, which is one of the largest startups, if you like, or startups evolving into an enterprise tech company in the B2B tech SaaS space in Europe. We're number one in Germany. I think from a valuation perspective, number 5 or 6 in Europe. And it's been a tremendous journey since I've been on board for 2.5 years. But obviously, that's not where my career started, with over almost 20 years in B2B tech SaaS and sales related and go-to-market related roles. I was lucky enough to collect a bit of experience under my belt, shall we say. It's fun to share these journeys and the successes, but also the failures, especially those, because I think there's a lot of people out there and young organizations, entrepreneurs, but also tech leaders who would probably benefit from a lot of the learnings of those stories. So the journey started off actually in the automotive industry, where I was responsible for developing and implementing Salesforce. So it's a family-run company from Austria, and I was in the German European subsidiary leading their implementation of Salesforce and some of the go-to-market strategies around tech tools and the tech stack that they implemented. So very early on in my career, I was actually involved with building up and evolving a tech stack for a globally operating B2B company in the automotive space. And my role essentially was a CRM coach. So we took the technology, the process, and the human beings, and we put them all into this triad of perfection, and then we implemented that approach across the globe. So very early on in my career, I was confronted and involved with a lot of go-to-market teams, sales, and customer service. So really, that's why I brought together the go-to-market aspect of marketing being very strongly attached to the sales and service operations within an organization. And from there, I went to Salesforce, spent the best part of 10 years in that organization, and then moved on to be CMO of one of the largest German startups in terms of funding, where I stayed for a year before I then joined Celonis as their VP marketing. And here I am today talking to you about B2B revenue marketing.
Fantastic. And throughout those years and career, has there been any key mentors or leaders that kind of help shape your thinking around the importance of revenue, marketing, go-to-market, and the importance that marketing holds in assisting sales in terms of driving that pipeline?
Yeah, 100%. So it's interesting that a lot of the work that I do today, it is grounded in my product marketing roles from back in the days. So if I look at revenue marketing, it always comes back to being relevant and also creating urgency. And that's some of the things that I learned through my professional lifetime mentor, and also, meanwhile, very good friend, Trisha Gelman, who used to run a lot of very senior positions, or she was in a lot of senior positions at Salesforce back in the days, and now she's the CMO at Box. And I think she was a very impactful and an educating individual in my career. So I learned a lot through her, and also how to engage sales teams, sales leaders, how to build up the messaging and the value propositions of multiple B2B tech SaaS products within Salesforce. The journey continued with individuals in the sales space, notably Joachim Schreiner in the DACH market in Germany for Salesforce, but then also a gentleman called Blaise Roulet, who was leading the Salesforce organization in Switzerland, because I moved from Germany to Switzerland to build up the marketing and go-to-market function for Salesforce in Switzerland. And there I really experienced a tightly interwoven and very tightly knit go-to-market approach, where sales was truly interested in marketing and allowed, for the first time in my experience, I felt it very profoundly, that sales wanted marketing at the table to educate, to prescribe, to predict what should be done next. And I found those individuals to be very impactful. There's also Colin Fleming, who's now the CMO at ServiceNow. So a lot of my very influential career impacts, they result from what I learned at Salesforce. I think that was the best school that I could have gone through in order to be at the point where I am today. And as I said at the beginning, the two things that I learned at that time and throughout my career were always be relevant and create urgency. Those are the two things that have always resonated very well with what I do, and they continue to resonate with me today. And that's what I also translate to my teams and the leadership journey that I uphold at Celonis.
And in recent years, you've started to invest, advise B2B tech startups. How did that kind of come about from the corporate kind of professional life of marketing to then, being almost the owner, the investor, the advisor? How did that kind of come about?
That's a good question, and actually the right time to ask that, because it's very fitting. I'm at Davos at the moment, and at the World Economic Forum, and actually about 6 or 7 years ago, I met an individual who's very connected in the Mexican and the Latin American startup scene, and we ended up going to Burning Man together. And he founded a couple of companies and asked me for some marketing support. And when we started talking about what can be done to improve his business and how to restructure his go-to-market approach and use, at the time, not necessarily revenue marketing or revenue orchestration, but he was just curious about how to use the limited funds that he had for one of his startups in the best way possible. So I started advising him, and we just jumped on a few calls, and then he asked me if I wanted to invest some money to just solidify that approach, how we were working together. And it ended up just being strategic advisory, operational support in marketing and go-to-market and operations, and then also obviously the financial component. And from then on, I got involved with some of the VCs, for example, Cenovo in Germany. Spoke to some of the partners. They invited me to some of the partner days and also startup days where they bring together their portfolio companies. And I presented a couple of concepts and evolutionary concepts that I had from the time at Salesforce, but also at Celonis. Yeah, and then it just trickled down. Founders reaching out, some of the VCs wanting me to co-invest, and I ended up being very excited about this entire approach. So besides working in enterprise tech, for large organizations and dealing with very complex B2B buying centers and economic buyers and everything that is involved in B2B tech SaaS, I also thoroughly enjoy the world of startups and working with the founders there. And it's really exciting because bringing these two worlds together, they can truly learn from each other. There's multiple things that I usually translate one way or the other. So super exciting.
Sounds like a brilliant mix and always going, I imagine, balancing the two and one complements the other. Like you mentioned, I think, you can probably test out new things maybe on the startups. They have, less of an approach. You're kind of shaping it as you go. So I imagine it's much more flexible and adaptable where you can really try the latest things and even use that as a testing ground to bring that into the enterprise. So that's pretty cool. It's a good approach.
And startups are usually also limited in terms of budget and resources. So, they're also keen on obtaining some advice that is actionable. You don't want to be messing around for too long because you don't have that runway in terms of your finances or the time. So you need to focus on a few things and providing them with advice, but also historically speaking, some of the things that have worked and haven't worked, it gives them a good path to success.
Speaking of that actionable advice, that's a nice little segue into our next section in terms of the actionable insights. So what are the biggest challenges, in your opinion, facing B2B technology companies when they're trying to make marketing a true revenue driver rather than a cost center?
I'm not going to start with the traditional data silos. I'll come to those in a second, but maybe something that we currently work on a lot at Celonis, and that I also looked at it during my Salesforce days when we structured campaigns and events and we played, the full spectrum of the marketing funnel, if you like. But let me start with something that I call the MQL scenario, or some might even call it a trap, or being caught in the MQL scenario. And I think what we need to look at there is the kind of lead volume that you have as an organization, instead of just merely, not just at the volume, but also the quality of the leads is important. But just looking at the leads is one thing. And what I would love for companies to do a lot more. And the traps that they typically fall into is that they don't look at that closed won revenue aspect of it. So since we're talking about revenue marketing and revenue orchestration, I think this is the very first point and most important one that I need to stipulate and call out, that it should always be hinging on the closed won revenue ratios of your organization, your go-to-market approach. So that also creates a lot of that friction between sales and marketing and services. So essentially the funnel or bow tie, and I come to that in a bit, as we call it, when we look at that entire customer journey, that's key. So data silos, that kind of correlates to what I just said about marketing and sales and services. I think that's where you need to make sure that the activities across all of those actually drive the final deal, and that in marketing, you're also responsible to unify your RevOps stack to ensure that all of these components are interwoven and kind of interlock and work together. I think that's nothing new to most marketers, but actually through a governance model, putting this into place, that's where a lot of organizations fail, because they don't follow through. They have very good intentions at the beginning of the year, but then you see it, kind of like trickling out and easing off. So you got to keep on top of that. I think there's a lot of commoditization of content, because you see a lot of AI content being pushed out into the market, and our buyers, and I sense this at Celonis especially, because it's process intelligence and enterprise AI and supply chain optimization and system transformation in the office of the CIO. You're speaking with a lot of experts, so they sense the BS very quickly if your content isn't spot on. So if you commoditize your content through AI, or if you are not fully involved in your vertical and industry specific messaging, then you're losing out. So that's one of the other big gaps or traps, as you call them, that I see. In terms of content, let me add one more. It's gating content too early, or gating content at all. So most of the buyers that we see, and we'll probably talk about it later on, how many buyers are out there in the market for your technology or your solutions. So I think a lot of those buyers that are in the market, they would have already done their research. So when they come to your website, when they get, when they want additional details and information, I think it's quite silly nowadays to gate your content, especially the relevant one that would push them onto the next stage of them wanting a demo or wanting to speak to an expert. So freeing up that content is key. And I still see a lot of B2B organizations, or B2B tech organizations, that are gating their content, hoping that they can generate a lead from that. I think that's a very outdated model.
For those B2B tech companies that have the gated content, and they might be saying, we need the emails, we need to, remarket to them. And the only way to do that is through, subscribing and sending it to their email. How can they maybe find a new approach, or maybe what's your advice to those companies who need to try a new format and leave the content, be ungated? What would you say to those companies to convince them to try it out?
I think a lot of what we see today, and we're also building this at Celonis, is a heavy community approach. And communities essentially collect individuals who want to share. There needs to be conversational marketing. There needs to be the ability to ask questions without you as an organization expecting too much from the individual on the other side. Once you start building that trust within those communities, within those forums, within an event structure, so that would be my answer. Create those environments, create a petri dish where you plant the seed and it can grow. That's what you need to do. You need to be able to build that trust, and trust is built through communities. We're human beings. We've been sitting around the fire telling stories since we can walk and think, and that's what we need to do again today. We need to tell great stories. We need to tell stories about success, about impact, about what actually works, and how some of those industry leaders, if you look at some industry leaders in the retail space and supply chain, for example, how they are successful with using a technology. If you can manage to communicate that success story effectively, you will very quickly see that domino stone that you tipped over will hit the next, and so on. So I think building great communities, having reliable and trustworthy customer advocacy programs that create stories, bringing customers and prospects and partners together, and also the employees of your organization in impactful events where you're measuring the right KPIs and not vanity metrics. That goes back to the conversation that we have with sales, that it truly matters for everyone who's involved. That builds trust. And it's a long journey in order to be successful. But there's a number of ways besides, your digital channels and campaign-oriented metrics, where you can yield details from your audience that they're willing to share with you in order to take that next step in the journey with you. And it all starts off with a word that is used way too much, which is trust. And I don't even want to overuse it because it's just so, it's been sucked dry. And I try to say, cut through the noise. It's all about the signal. Make sure your signal hits and forget about the noise left and right, because there's plenty of it. So the right format, it could be an event, could be, a community. We do a lot with user groups. We ask a lot of questions in those user groups. That creates a lot of trust as well, actually listening to your audiences. I think that's very impactful.
And you mentioned it just previously about the different approach that you have in terms of referencing as the bow tie approach, and how you can kind of structure your maybe RevOps, revenue orchestration to, maybe symbol that. How does that approach work? And how could maybe other B2B tech companies frame their strategy and tactics around that kind of framework?
When I talk about the bow tie, it's the same as a funnel, but then again, slightly different, because obviously you start on one side with all of your awareness programs. This is how it kind of looks like a bow tie, and you lead this down to a closed opportunity or an opportunity that is won. That's not where the journey stops. Early on we talked about the trap where you have a lead, or you collect a certain amount of leads, and they might even be high quality leads, and then you hand them over. They turn into MQLs. MQLs are measured onto meetings. You have a certain attribution model tied to it. You get to the opportunity, but what happens after? And this is really where it turns into the bow tie, because that's when it goes back up, and that's kind of your expand and renewal motion all the way to anti-churn measures. That's what we call as a KPI our net new ARR, in the sense of annual recurring revenue. Usually you also subtract the churn from it, whatever percentage it may be in your organization. So marketing is actually responsible for orchestrating everything from the awareness phase down to an opportunity, but then also up. And that's where it's kind of a bow tie, all the way up to customer advocacy. And you have all these great customers of yours raving about your solutions and engagement with your organization at conferences and in webinars and, on your website as testimonials, whatever it is. So you orchestrate that entire process, and it includes account-based marketing towards, the later stages of an opportunity, all the way to expand and renewal motion of existing customers, executive briefing centers, which is also a team that I run at Celonis, where we bring in over 200 C-levels per year around the globe in order to inform them about, and it's truly inform them and discuss about how our technology can benefit their enterprise AI development, their supply chain resilience, or, for example, their system transformation in the office of the CIO. So taking an account and looking at it from the beginning of their journey as a lead coming in, and multiple leads as part of the buying center, all the way to this customer being a happy customer and being an advocate of your brand and your solutions. That's what I call the perfect revenue marketing journey, the perfect revenue orchestration, and allocating your budget and headcount and time and overall your resources that are available to you to really make that count. And as you have your land motion, your expand motion, your renewal motion, your anti-churn motions, it's essential that you are very well aware of where you need to end up as a business in terms of your annual contract value, but also your ARR, your annual, your recurring revenue, and then you align with your sales management and your leadership team how marketing funds should be allocated towards these initiatives within that bow tie, not just the funnel that goes from awareness to closing a deal, but rather the entire journey and looking at the customer acquisition cost and your lifetime value of that customer and how your marketing initiatives impact it.
100%, because a lot of the time people are just focused on getting the customer, and that's it. But like you said there, it's much cheaper and more effective to keep the retention lifetime value of a customer than trying to acquire new ones the whole time. And obviously, if you're churning more than you're taking in, the business model is failing at some point. So actually putting the emphasis on making sure the customers you have are happy and finding ways to create more advocacy, because people buy from people essentially. We can get people into our process as much as we
100%.
want.
And think about it, the piano, absolutely. The piano has 88 keys, right? So if anybody is out there who plays a piano, you have 52 white keys, 36 black. There's so much you can do as a marketer. And I'm not talking about, marketing ops at the moment. I'm talking about the actual tactics that you can employ in order to have an impact on a positive impact on your go-to-market approach in your organization. So you'd be surprised once you start exploring all of the other domains in marketing and you start being really good at it. Your sales organization, your entire go-to-market organization will come to you for advice, because they realize that you're reducing the sales cycle of an opportunity. It's, we talk about the velocity of a deal, the deal velocity. That is truly impactful. That is the metric that a sales leader will turn towards and say, you're my partner in crime.
Topic that we discuss a lot on the 1% Insight is the concept that, the majority of your prospects and potential buyers are not in an active buying decision at this given moment. So given this recording, it's 12 o'clock here in Ireland on a Monday morning. You may think that every customer is waiting for you just to give that perfect message or that perfect piece of content, and that's going to be the thing that tips them over the edge and be like, yes, I'm making the buying decision today. When in reality, we know it takes a lot longer than that, and a lot more content and different touch points. And that concept can be difficult for people, because obviously there's a less majority to concentrate on for getting revenue in right now, which is important, especially like we mentioned earlier, in terms of people that don't have necessarily a long runway and can't afford to wait 12 months or hope. So as a kind of a word of advice, what tactics work well for, I guess, marketing to out-of-market buyers who might be the majority? So is there any particular tactic that you found has worked well throughout your career? And then on the other side, in terms of closing that opportunity and how marketing can, help at the lower stages and the end stages of that buying journey, what tactic kind of works well to kind of help people make that decision? So
let me answer the first question first. So what are we doing in terms of ensuring that we're also touching future demand, if I understand you correctly? So that's kind of, also having an eye as a revenue marketer. And I'll be honest with you, for the most part of my career, I've always kind of been in the revenue marketing corner, even before it was called revenue marketing. And I sometimes think, here was some marketing geniuses at work again, inventing a word to talk about stuff that's always existed, and that was always very clear to people. But that being said, I was never too close to the brand side of the marketing sphere and the marketing world. So in the current era, especially at Celonis, I work very closely with our brand team. And as a revenue marketer, I stand corrected. Brand is so important, your entire brand salience, how you should not pitch product. You should not communicate product too much. You need to own that entire domain of how your solution can actually solve issues and the problems of the customers, and communicating that in a simple, straightforward fashion. So almost like if you think about some high value thought leadership, high value education, just trying to break it down for people and make them understand how that works. How does revenue marketing come into play when it comes to brand? It's very simple, actually. So at the leadership level, so when I align with our chief brand officer, we discuss every single tactic. So that answers your question, hopefully. Every single tactic that I plan for next fiscal year, we plan now how we ensure that we have a very straightforward, easy to understand messaging framework with a value proposition that is incorporated in our brand communication. So the brand becomes part of every single campaign. It includes our proprietary Celonis events. It includes third-party events. Brand is always involved. We have brand guide us throughout our entire bow tie, from our awareness phase, where brand has obviously always been at home, but we take it along with us to, across the entire customer life cycle, throughout that entire customer journey, and ensure that up until that point, an opportunity is created and closed ideally, and the onward path in the bow tie to expanding and renewing through ABM programs, even guerrilla marketing tactics, expand campaigns, executive briefing centers that we have. An example of one of those is in Munich, where we bring technology to life for artificial intelligence, for supply chain. Our brand team was involved. You feel Celonis in every single step of the way for your customers. And then I think I kind of mentioned it also already in the second half of the journey. So later on in the funnel or in the bow tie, if you like, how do we ensure that we work together with our sales teams? How do we ensure that we provide a benefit and value to them? I think that's really important to ensure that every single AE, account director, managing members of the team who have multiple account executives under their management, and also your CRO, that they trust what you're doing. You need to illustrate to them what you're doing in order to help them to close deals and reduce that sales cycle in terms of time. So deal velocity, as I mentioned before, and then also visualize. And that would be my tip: visualize to them that the tactics that you're creating, that they have an impact. And I know lots of people don't want to build slides nowadays, and they are, they're refraining from overloading an organization with visuals. But I think don't forget, we work in marketing. We tell stories, and you also, as much as you need to tell great stories for your value prop and your messaging framework externally, you also need to do that internally. And that's what we do at Celonis. We paint a picture internally. We share success stories internally. When we have a new customer, such as the one that I can also mention here, Fujitsu, who have just embraced our technology to enable their enterprise AI activities, and they're doing it very successfully. When that happens, make sure you tell everyone within your organization so they all tell the same story. The amount of stories that I see out there, great videos being produced for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're not seen, they're not used, they're not utilized in your go-to-market activities, in your outbound activities through your BDRs or SDRs. I think it's a huge downfall of any marketing organization that creates an asset and it's not used effectively. So as you close deals, as you're helping to close deals, make sure you're listening to your sales organization, create the assets that they need. If it's a presentation, if it's a demo, if it's a webinar, if it's an executive briefing center, a guerrilla marketing tactic as part of your account-based marketing strategy, just open your ears and listen very carefully what could tip the customer over to sign that deal.
I think that's a fantastic guide, actually, just to balance the both building the brand and building demand, and then obviously closing that as well. And content can play a role for people who might be in content marketing teams. What you create for early stage of the buying journey can really help move people along. But don't forget, the important part too is that throughout the different, whether it's outreach or, like you mentioned, Guntram there, close the deal with your BDRs. Make sure they have easy access to the customer testimonial videos and the success stories that they have.
Actually, Jack, sorry, maybe just in terms of relevance, there's one important one that I forgot, and that's also just very quickly is when you have a champion inside your buying center, also understand exactly, and marketing should always do more listening than speaking. Even though I do a lot of talking right now, excuse the monologue, but there's so much value in also understanding the buying center and helping an internal champion inside the buying center to sell on your behalf. I think we sometimes underestimate that, that gatekeeper or that coach inside the buying center can be instrumental in getting you over the line. So marketing should also truly help. And can be anything. It can be little things like, provide them with a bit of swag that they can, distribute in the office, make your organization and your brand more known and seen. Little things like that. It's just a food for thought.
Placing myself in the shoes of maybe a marketing team at a B2B tech SaaS company right now, and they might be looking for the year ahead in 2026, and they're looking at, what KPI should I be using and how do I track that and attribute it right to make sure that, they're showcasing the value of the efforts they are doing on a yearly basis and how that's impacting pipeline and revenue. I know we spoke about it earlier, but is there any kind of key KPIs that you think marketing teams should be doing a better job at tracking and making sure they're reporting on that on a bi-weekly, monthly basis and reporting to their management teams?
Oh yeah, 100%. So we're looking very specifically, we're looking at marketing touch pipeline. Again, to most marketers out there, that would not be anything new, but we look at look at this in terms of as part of our go-to-market approach, we look at this in our dashboards on a daily basis, if you like. We look at the tactics and how those individual tactics are influencing the opportunities, either to progress an opportunity or to also how a tactic has aided in closing that opportunity. So in terms of marketing touch pipeline, that's one metric that we look at. We also look at marketing touched new logo. So we look at the new logos that we've created as part of our land deals, and we see how many of those that were closed and one that we actually touched. That's also very important. And again, back to the discussion or to the conversation we had earlier on about aligning with your sales teams on the KPIs. I think I would not stand alone in this world to say that as a marketer, I've walked into situations with sales leaders and the leadership team where I presented some marketing metrics that the sales leader either didn't understand or didn't want to understand. So it's also finding a common ground to listen to your sales leadership and your go-to-market organization to understand what's truly valuable to them. And that can be, for example, what we've introduced recently is net new ARR. So, for example, my EMEA sales leader is very much interested in understanding how marketing helps to reduce the amount of churn that we could potentially have in the organization. And often that crystallizes very early on. If a deal is going well, if it will be renewed after a certain period of time as part of your contractual obligations, and the TCV that the total contract value that you've structured over multiple years. So when these contracts run out, just as an example, a net new ARR refers to everything minus churn. So how do you reduce that churn? And again, then also deal velocity. I think that's crucial. So looking at lead to opportunity reporting and the analysis part of that and illustrating that in dashboards, that's something that we do. And these are very concrete KPIs. And that's something where you then can also take that data and in meetings, instead of just showing that data, you then say, well, listen, this data is coming from, or the results of this data are coming from this lead source. We have over a period of, a couple of years, we've experienced that opportunities of a certain value and a total contract value of that opportunity have closed much faster when they came from here and they were impacted by these tactics. And we can also use AI to actually, question the system, question the data to find these positive anomalies. And that's exactly what I look at the moment, also to use technology. And we drink our own champagne in terms of AI and unraveling that data that we do for other organizations at Celonis. We unravel our own data, we bring it to the surface, and then we look at those campaigns and we find a pattern of success. And I think that's super, super impactful as a marketer to look at campaign analytics with the power of AI, artificial intelligence and the algorithms and the large language models, and being able to probe your data and question your data to find those winning formulas. Because I know out there's plenty of people who run campaigns and they're not yielding what they should be yielding. And the question is, what do you shut down and where do you double down? And that's where data-driven revenue marketing approach can truly help you.
A lot of people want a kind of a blanket approach to KPIs, like it can be directly applied, to companies. But the truth is that your company actually might be placing a different strategy at this time of their, life cycle and journey within their company. So the KPIs mightn't be the exact same as someone you see, maybe your neighbor, and they're in a totally different company. They might be 10 times the size of you, and they might be, mainly focusing on reducing churn. So therefore the KPIs are different. So I think it's important as well for marketers that there's no standard that every company should track the same KPI. It's going to vary. And I think that was a great point just to showcase that variety of where you're at.
You can follow some market trends, but at the end of the day, especially, if you're a category creator like Celonis is, we have our own sales cycles, we're still educating the market on process intelligence and how it impacts enterprise AI and how it's actually instrumental. I mean, AI is actually in our DNA. As we pivot our messaging and become more and more relevant for a lot of organizations on this planet, I think it's truly important to understand exactly as you said, the right KPIs and use your own data to deduct the next steps, and then also advise your leadership team and your sales leadership on what those next actions should be. And sales is very powerful in an organization. If you have a sales leader on your side and you say, I want to double down on this kind of campaign, you have his or her back, and he has or she has yours, then you can move mountains. It's super impactful, because at the end of the day, you're creating revenue. That's what you're doing. You're assisting the creation of revenue, and there's no more. Yeah, that's the most important thing in that context.
Brilliant, Guntram. And before you share your 1% insight with our audience today, we have a rapid fire round here at the 1% Insight. So 3 short questions. And the first one is best resource. So it can either be a book, it could be an online resource, a newsletter, a podcast for B2B technology marketers.
I actually have a good one. So one answer that I haven't given, I'm a big fan of Blinkist. It's an app that allows you to kind of, it does these book summaries. So I'm not going to share any podcasts with you today, because I usually share a podcast example, and there's plenty of those out there. But there's a new book on Blinkist, which is called AI Strategy for Sales and Marketing. And it's written by Katie King. Super cool. I think she hits the nail on the head when she describes how AI can be used in those scenarios, and gives some really great examples from the real world, and makes it very tangible, if you like. And one that I'm going to share with you, and I say this every single time because it's my holy Bible when it comes to sales. And remember, I used to travel around the world and teach people to use Salesforce, especially working a lot with sales. And what we had to do, we linked Neil Rackham's major account sales strategy, sales process with the CRM tool back in the days, and implemented it in the tool. So Neil Rackham major account sales strategy and spin selling, and that looks at the decision cycle of a customer from the buyer perspective. So you're basically talking about sales strategy, but you're looking at it from the purchasing side, and that's very powerful to truly understand the other side.
The second question for you, Guntram, is a company. So you can't mention Celonis. That is doing great. That is doing great B2B technology SaaS marketing, in your opinion.
Yeah, that's an easy one. I'm slightly biased because Colin Fleming, the CMO at ServiceNow, is one of my legendary ambassadors for brand marketing and go-to-market marketing. So, and a friend. So his campaign, and actually the one that Jim Lesser, the chief brand officer, put into the market for ServiceNow, and how they put AI to work for people. It's absolutely fantastic. And they brought in Idris Elba as a brand ambassador. And if you haven't seen that one yet, I mean, it's brilliant. And it's, you see, and Colin always says, if I may quote him, the B in B2B doesn't stand for boring. That's what he said in one of his Adobe keynotes that he held last year. And it's so true. I mean, there's so much wit and fun and excitement in those, in how B2B is communicated by ServiceNow. They've done a great job. So kudos to you guys.
Fantastic, and hopefully more B2B tech companies take a leaf out of their book. And it is going through a bit of a transition. Things are getting a bit more interesting with the content. It's not just white papers and like you mentioned there, gated reports and all those different elements. So it's a really exciting time to be in B2B tech. And then the last 100%. One for the rapid fire round is: if you weren't in marketing, what would you be doing?
If I wasn't in marketing, what would I be doing? I guess I'd be a doctor, like my dad. A surgeon, because I always look up to my dad for having an impact on a day-to-day basis. So he's 79, he's still working. He is a legend of mine, and I probably would have followed in his footsteps. But I'm the black sheep of the family. I didn't go through medical school. Went to business. So I'd be a doctor or a surgeon.
Last question I have for you, Guntram, and thank you very much for your time today, is what is your 1% insight that you would share with our audience?
I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Be relevant and create urgency, not just for your business, also for yourself, to build your own personal brand. So relevance and urgency is my 1% insight. Cut through the noise, be signal.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Guntram. Where can our audience learn more about yourself, the work you do, and also Celonis?
Well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Guntram Friede. Very simple, complex name, but you can find me. There's not too many of those. And Celonis on our website. Let me know what you think. We've just redeveloped, so kudos to our entire team. They've just redeveloped the entire digital approach and web presence to make it a lot more tangible and understandable what we do and how we impact this world in terms of AI. So and system transformation, supply chain. I think it's fantastic what they've done. So yeah, come and join the conversation and reach out and ask me questions. And if you disagree with anything that you heard today, or if you have some additional topics that you would like to explore, I don't just say it, I follow up. So looking forward to hearing from you. And thanks for having me, Jack.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time today, Guntram.